sides. I think I was mostly on vacation, so not much of an update from me. But I know Yufan and Scott were working primarily on the scale stuff, and I'll have them. We can have them talk in details about that. But once we get into that, I think that's a much more detailed discussion. So let's. That's kind of next on the agenda, anyway. So I just a note that we were primarily working on scale benchmarking, benchmark tests, and trying to get a couple of different scale approaches going. So that was primarily at Google's end. And again, we'll go more into details. But anything from your end, Caleb?
I just pinged Starley for status. He has it working in an environment, and apparently there were no major snafus or issues. I'm curious to see if he actually got all our serialization and extension capabilities all hooked up. But as far as I know, things have gone very smoothly. It's taken a little while, and we're still not deploying as part of our rollout thing, but that's scheduled for this sprint. So.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. And do you anticipate kind of trying to get once you have integrated? So I'm assuming right now it's primarily the effort is integration itself, right? Once you're integrated, do you have like a scale or like I'm asking since we are primarily trying to do that, but yeah.
Yeah, I know last time we talked that the goal is to have that this time. Okay. It's in an environment, but it's not in the environment that we use for scale and stress, so it's not quite stood up that way yet. Okay. But for next sprint, so before the next meeting, the goal is to have and actually something we should share before the meeting, right? Is some of our initial takes and notes and reports.
Perfect. So that's awesome. I think sometime later in the agenda, I have how we actually line up the releases and your integration and GDC. I think things are starting to converge if we keep GDC as like a checkpoint for trying to arrive at like 1.0 or at least if not an integrated version. So we'll get to that. Do you think it's a good time to jump into scale? I can give a quick summary for where we are and then we can discuss. Okay. So I think primarily there were a couple of investigations that were going on. One was we hit, as you know, the last time the status quo was we identified that we were hitting scale issues, but we weren't exactly clear on why or where. We hadn't had a chance to dig in. So I think Yufan was driving that bit to try and run some bottleneck tests on Redis. And he identified that the Z-range queries were the slowest. And he did some experiments after that, and I think there are lots of findings that he'll go into. But at a high level, that's what that was one track we were following as to just how to get Redis configuration working. I think the most positive one right now is like reading from multiple replicas. It's harder to set up, but it's actually like you write to master read across different slave replicas. That's kind of the setup. He again tried a few others, cluster mode and whatnot, and he can elaborate. In the parallel, we kind of wanted to just get the wheels rolling on even having the in-memory indexes and in-memory state essentially. So I think Scott was working on a prototype for that. I don't know if he'll have numbers to share, but with both of these, we are also in parallel. I think Scott and Yufan were working on scale and benchmark tests where we'll have like a concrete set of tests then that can give us results across these. So that's kind of the summary. I can have I think both of them can go into the details of their respective findings next.
Actually, I want to put another note on that. Something else I did is rewrite the synchronizer.
Oh, yes.
So there's a lot of places within OpenMatch where like the match function is streaming out a list of matches or proposals, and the evaluator is getting the stream, and then it has a stream going out, and the fetch matches call is getting it back. And we were buffering them for not really any reason. It was just like simpler in the code to do that. So it's not fully streaming yet, but the code is written in a way now that it's set up to relatively easily. I just need to get back to it, fully do that streaming. So that will be good for scale, obviously, because we're not, and just like performance in general, we're not waiting unnecessarily to pass along the messages.
So rewriting the synchronizer is referring to the fact that the synchronizer is now the holding zone for all match function results as they stream in, right? And then the execution is fired?
So like just rewriting as in like we did new code so that because the code did it the code previously was very state based in that like it didn't really support the streaming.
Yeah.
So there's multiple things all going on at once with go routines and channels and all that. So it's just a different code and approach to support the streaming model.
And I think I'll add a quick note there for Caleb. This kind of was like there was a blocking issue that you had last time around, which was like we used to wait for the entire synchronization cycle before, even if all of the matches had returned, right? Like they started from there, like we were trying to see how we could send the results out. But I think Scott figured that, I mean, that's probably just one optimization. He figured that there was a lot of waiting. Like essentially originally there was no streams in the original API. I think we added the streams to a workaround, like the gRPC couldn't send like one huge payload. So when we added streams originally, we were just buffering them all the places. So I think Scott kind of changed the approach for the synchronizer to just have things flow through as a single stream and process things around. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's another good point is now it doesn't have to wait for the synchronizer or that doesn't have to wait for the proposal window to close if all the match functions are finished. Also, it now sends a message out to the match functions if the synchronizer window does close of like, hey, you should cancel, like you've overrun any matches you send at this point are going to get dropped anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Did you just put that as a stream message?
Yeah, it like the back end opens up a stream to the synchronizer, and the synchronizer will like say, hey, you can start running your match functions now, and then hey, you should cancel them because I'm gonna ignore the results now.
Okay, so there's just a stream between the back end and the synchronizer.
Yeah,
everything's flowing over, and eventually the synchronizer is able to send a signal back that then sends signals to all the running match functions.
Exactly.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, that's something that we always talked about having some way of doing, because it's just one of those difficult problems to understand from the context of a match function. So that's really cool that we might get like a cancellation notification that allows people to spin down their functions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think there is some interesting issues there that Scott and I were discussing. I don't know if Scott, you want to dive into them right now, or maybe in the issues discussion later. But like around how the errors bubble up if things get canceled and things like that.
I don't know. I will note though, however, that like when we're running our skill tests right now, we're trying to get them to work, and there's getting some results that maybe there's something weird in the synchronizer going on. Or the results are just bouncing off the back end. I'm not quite sure. So we'll see what the problem is.
Work in progress.
Yeah. Okay.
That's fantastic.
On the positive side, I think the scale tests are kind of truly basically hammering the system and testing it more like at production scale. Yeah. So we are weeding out any issues that our typical like unit tests wouldn't catch. So that's a good part.
Let's get back to the other stuff later in the issues.
Yes, perfect.
What was the original question?
Benchmarking and Redis.
Yes.
And in-memory.
Just like that. Okay. So the status is our benchmark tests are falling over. However, last night I found a bug in them with how we were trying to do it. And there's some just weird behavior. So we really tried hard to get numbers for today for both just like the standard implementation and then the in-memory one, but we just didn't make it.
Okay. But by standard, you mean the current one that's
right now. That's unfortunately not working. So go ahead.
No, I think by standard, you mean what's currently checked in, right? Not what your fund's working on.
Yes, that is correct. So what I'm currently trying to run something for checked in. I did run the broken one on my in-memory prototype, and it was less broken.
Okay.
But it was still very broken. But the good news is that we have some infrastructure set up for like deploying the pods out and everything. You did that. And then I've added Grafana metrics on top of it.
Okay.
So, like we have pretty graphs that are showing bad numbers.
Cool.
So, I'm thinking there's probably some low-hanging fruit here of like either the scale tests aren't doing the right thing, or there's something in the synchronizer or something along those lines.
Okay.
So hopefully soon we will get them to behave, and then actually start getting some really good numbers out.
Perfect.
And the current scenario that I'm trying to run is kind of a standard team-based game, with skill. So you have some regions, you have skill ranges that you're trying to match close to,
Okay.
and you have like a couple game modes. I think the player base.
For your Grafana
Yeah.
dashboard,
Yes.
are there instructions, or is there a dashboard checked in?
Yep.
For the scale, yeah.
Okay. Cool.
There aren't instructions. There is a dashboard checked in.
Okay. Sounds good.
Well, the instructions are run a couple make commands, so we could get those to you if you really wanted them. And we will publish them once we actually get it all working.
Cool.
And then we wanted to do like a first match type scale test as well, of just like how much can you do with one match function, being the whole world, and then probably like a battle royale one, just because it's easy. Just there's end regions and players go into one region, and when it hits 100 players, it spits out a match, kind of thing. So that kind of hopefully will give us a little bit of flexibility for how you want to do these benchmarks, and we can really pump up the profile count and that kind of stuff if we want to, or ticket creation count.
Do we have a sense for where the profile count maxes out?
I think in the current implementation, around 4,000 profiles for 5K tickets. It's actually not just the profile count that's interesting. It's basically the pending pool size combination along with the profile count that becomes interesting. So I think, and I'm quoting Yufan here, so he'll probably get into details of these in a bit anyway. So maybe hold off your question until he is done with this bit. But yeah.
I'm saying less than that, but that's because I think there's something going wrong maybe with the synchronizer. So I will
Go ahead.
get that to you. Oh yeah, do you have something you found? Or?
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, because the 4K profiles with 5K tickets is a number that I got using the original synchronizer. Yeah.
Okay.
And the 5K tickets is 5K in the pool?
5K pending tickets, yes.
Okay. Okay, and then I don't know if we want to get into details of the prototype for in-memory or not. I wrote a prototype. It is a hash map in Go with gRPC service on top of it. And a stream out to the logic instances, which have a hash map of tickets, and a query comes in and it like makes sure it's up to date, and then it loops over the tickets, and just if it meets the filters, returns it. Okay. A little more complicated than that, but like that's the rough picture of the prototype. So we're gonna try getting numbers from. We're gonna try to get like a healthy numbers for the main, or like the master today, I think, and then see where it breaks. Swap. I just have my prototype in a different branch because it's easier to not merge it, and I'll just keep merging into that one, keep it up to date, and then run the same scale tests, and then see where it breaks, and then we can make an educated decision about what we want to do.
Yeah, What might be helpful, Scott, I probably if we were all in the room today, some whiteboarding might have helped, but I don't think over GVC it's the best to kind of go over the design for the prototype.
I have a
So
whiteboard. If you want to do that.
well, I don't know if you have like a one pager or like a basic level diagram. I asked you a few questions and those might be helpful. Like, are we swapping out Redis completely, or is Redis still the state store for the tickets and this is just indexing in memory? I mean, I know the answers to those, but I think those might be good instruction points for asking more questions. So maybe what we might need to do if we want to spare like an hour or so next week is once we get the numbers from like the current one with UFunds experiments and this, we reconverge to kind of make a decision on whether we need the in-store in-memory implementation of the state store. Because I don't know if we'll be able to make the decision today. I think we'll not be able to for sure, but I don't know if we probably will need some more. And the other question in my mind would be like, what would it take to make the prototype real, right? Because there is the amount of effort to kind of make sure what's missing today versus what else needs to be written before we completely replace Redis. So we will definitely need, I guess, more in-person time to even discuss the approach. But I think you're on the right track where if you have numbers to share before, and if those numbers look great, that would be a great starting point to even say like, hey, okay, this looks significantly better. What does it take? So Caleb, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you're going down the right path. Sorry, people were kind of cutting out there a little bit.
Okay, then I don't know if Yufan, do you want to go deep dive into your?
Yeah, sure. So there are two things that I've basically done in the past few weeks. Like one is the scale benchmark framework. So yeah, so for that one, like I did it together with Scale. Scale was basically working on adding metrics to it, but I have like a skeleton working. So previously, like our scale test was working, but all of the configurable parameters are just scattered everywhere. So makes user like pretty hard to control. Like for example, like the ticket creation rates or like number of profiles. This stuff's like, yeah, you need to have some deeper level understanding of how the scale test works to make things like under control. But now we have a benchmark framework that have like almost all parameters sitting together. There are something left right there that left us do, but is still much better than what we had before. So basically, all of our like current experiments will be done against the benchmark frameworks. Yeah, and make it easier to reproduce and easier to share. So, and the second things that I've done is benchmark the steps against Redis. So, and I have a short write up for it. Let me see if we can figure out. I'll send a link in the chat. Are you able to open it?
Yeah, if you have pictures, that might be useful.
Yeah.
I requested access.
Oh, okay.
Is this document? I'm expecting this is something we can just put out in the public domain, right? Like all of this is just open source stuff. So
yeah, I try to like I try to share it to the public, but it seems like it's okay. Here we go. Share with people in groups. Okay, here we go.
All right, I have access.
So it's the benchmark findings. So I do figure out like while I was running like open mesh under load, I do figure out Redis was experienced at 0 degrees of performance degradations when they're executing zero-inch byte scores. And in the worst case scenarios, the 99% of latencies, it goes up to 8 seconds if we have a Z set of size about 30K.
do you want to project it? I don't know if we want to screen share and just project that.
Yeah, sure.
For the benefit of.
Okay. One second.
Goodbye.
Is everybody frozen or just nobody's moving? Oh, everybody's moving. Okay.
Yeah. He's back.
Woo!
And he's muted.
Muted.
Scott is presenting. Scott is muted.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
So,
I think I'm
all
losing the room.
findings-
You keep going. I'll join you from the other room.
So all these findings are reproduced via the Redis benchmark feed that the Redis team provides. Yeah, so I was using a VSAT of FortiGate key value pairs to reproduce settings. Since Redis is a single thread, so I only fit it with 3 CPUs. And the key benchmark finding is 99% that latency goes up to 8 seconds for one single code. So basically, like during that time, the Redis master basically just hangs there, like, without doing anything. Like it can't create tickets, can't delete tickets, can't do any other things. So and the performance degradation starts when the Z-set numbers increase above 2,500 tickets. Yeah.
I know you might be still here, but
Yeah, it just keeps getting worse and worse. Yeah. Okay. So I did some research online. So there are 2 approaches that Redis suggests. One to scale the read. If you want to scale the reads, is by using Redis cluster. And if you want to scale the writes, it's basically using the Redis read-from replicas most. So right here, I'll probably like elaborate the scaling the scaling the reads parts, because that is the bottleneck that we're currently hitting. So there are there are some pros and cons for setting the read from replicas modes. So the pros is, theoretically speaking, you can scale the reads like infinitely, but the cons is like there are some overheads for Redis to sync over multiple slaves, and also it may introduce some stale data to the cluster, since only the data in the master nodes is guaranteed to be the latest.
Okay. So to clarify, like the overhead for, so I was trying to read this up, and it looks like the slaves may have stale data that you may read, and that's, for our use case, that should be okay though, right? Like we don't need perfect synchronize, like our entire synchronization model, etc., is not even meant to really guarantee that. There is no real timestamp guarantee for what tickets you will see at what point of time. I mean, within reason, I think it's okay for the data to be lagging on our reads compared to what's being written. I just want to clarify and make sure I'm not missing something there. Okay.
Yep. So the
Yeah.
standard is not a big deal for us, but there was also some like extra setups that were required to make the read from slaves works in production. So basically, the service discovery story. Yeah, because now we need a service discovery story, like either like in Castor Proxy or the Redis via the Redis Sentinel, to help us identify like what replicas are currently available. So like previously, we were like OpenMatch in OpenMatch state store implementation, we were connecting to the Redis master directly, because we know like is IP address in Kubernetes in the Kubernetes cluster, but now it's no longer the case. We need to query the Redis Sentinel to get the host name or IP address of these replicas, and then
Sure. And actually, just to add a note there, I think the Redis Sentinel is something that we are using just for like basically HA, right? Like if a master goes down, that's the one that does the new master election and whatnot. So you don't need that for discovery per se, but given that that's doing the high availability, that's the authoritative one you ask for discovery anyways. Okay.
Correct. So, and I do have some like future benchmarks when I have the read from replicas parts turned on. So I have the setup right here. And the findings is basically so Scott, could you post it scroll down a bit? So there are some. Okay, here we go. The drive, the link that I put on the bottom of the page.
Should I go to it?
Oh, yep.
Oh, loading, maybe.
Mhm.
Oh,
Okay, still showing your current tab.
yeah. Did you want to? Hold on, I'm making sure there's nothing sensitive. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
What do you?
So start from for example, filter ticket one master. Yeah. So my goal is to run each test for about 15 minutes or more. Yeah. So this is the result that I got yesterday. And when I have the reframe replicas mode turned off, you can see that the open match basically stopped working in the halfway. So everything crashed. It just doesn't come, and they never come back. And if you go to filter ticket
And read for replica turned off is basically the current state, just for record. Yeah.
Yep. So if we have 10 replicas, so we can see the performance, the 95% of performance is still pretty bad, like 5 seconds, but at least we see things are working slowly. And now, Scott, could you possibly go to Prometheus?
And Yufan, could you quickly elaborate on the kind of load that we are using for these results?
Oh yeah, so the result that I currently get right here. Give me 1 second. Let me find the setup. Okay, so the result that I get here are with 60 profiles, with 60K tickets pending.
Okay.
Without assigning or updating assignments.
Okay, so 60K pending, but is that the pattern where things are being continuously created, or is it more like you create a pool of 60K tickets and then try to pound it with 60 profiles?
I create a pool of 60K tickets.
Okay, so you create a pool of 60K tickets and then pound it with 60 profiles, and this is the amount of time you're looking at to drain the pool, essentially. Okay.
So, I'm just trying to solve the MM logic doesn't scale problem.
Okay.
Yeah. So could you possibly go to Prometheus 10 replicas at the bottom?
Oh, there it is.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so here is the graph that I get using Prometheus. So basically, the line right here, the blue line right here is the error line. So we can see that so though it works under 10 replicas, but the error rate is still 40% or 30%-ish. Some of the costs got canceled out because they passed the synchronizer window. But if we have the replicas set to 20.
And if you the errors are primarily because of MM logic falling over, do you know?
The errors. So there are two parts. So one is the MM logic falling over, and the other is because they passed the synchronizer window.
Oh, they passed the synchronizer time. Okay. So it takes too long. Okay.
Yeah. So this one is what I got when I have the Redis reframe replicas. The replica number set to 20. The aggregate is basically just below 1%. So reframe replicas does works, but I'm somewhat suspicious that do we really need 20 replicas for Redis?
Yeah, 20 sounds like a little much for this.
Yeah. So yeah, this is basically the findings that I currently get. We were able to resolve the MM logic bottleneck using either the in-memory stored prototype or the reframe replicas approach.
Okay. That's useful. I think the one thing I may note just looking at, and I was telling this to you, Fan, and Caleb, you can give some more inputs in terms of this, right? Is we currently have a specific set of inputs that we are trying these numbers with. I would like some more interesting inputs, like what's the incoming rate that we can support for ticket creation, let's say 1,000 tickets per second. Is that something that our regular setup supports? If not, how many replicas does it take to kind of support that for some constant set of profiles? Maybe 60, maybe tweak that number. But I think some more realistic kind of such interesting scenarios might help us figure out whether this actually will work.
And I think more than just rate, the indexed fields and what the profiles look like.
Yep.
Will probably give us very different characteristics.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
see what we have there.
Yeah.
If you have some ideas of like people are using these, double filters with these ranges kind of thing, or the
Absolutely.
overlapping ranges or whatever.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're
Yeah.
working to
I
get.
mean,
Sorry.
So from our interfacing, we're also trying to get some of that information as well. Right now, we have a ton of insight into like the way people are evaluating matchmaking technology. They're really interested in isolation, so they can separate dev, QA, and prod. And so they're not doing anything in prod yet, as far as we can tell. So we can't really bring too much insights to the production flow. We have a sense of some of their scenarios, but for the most part, as we kind of predicted would be, most of the folks I talked to haven't gotten to the design stage with this stuff yet. So it's just they're still learning.
That's good then.
I feel like it's okay for us to. So in my mind, if you ask me what question I'm trying to really answer, right? Is it like so long as things can horizontally scale for our reads, I think we are okay. The thing that previously was worrying us was sure we were kind of hitting a bottle issue where we were trying to horizontally scale our nodes, our Redis nodes, and whatnot, and weren't able to figure out why we aren't scaling, right? So if the looks like, at least from the basic scenario that Yufan has, that some horizontal scaling is possible, the only thing that worries me here is exactly what Yufan pointed out, which is like for this scenario, 20 Redis replicas is like maybe we are missing something in configuring what each of those are set up as or whatnot. So like right now, if I have to summarize it, I think we have evidence that when we said Redis doesn't scale, it's not, I mean, that blanket statement isn't right. There are ways to horizontally and scale the Redis reads and writes. It takes a little more effort. Yufan, I think the one thing I would mention is, I know you had a lot of cons as the complicated setup kind of a thing, right? And I don't see them particularly as cons, and we can discuss this, but I feel like a production setup looking more complicated than there is a Redis in the same cluster as OpenMatch runs is okay. I would be surprised if everything running in a cluster is just somebody's real production setup, right? So I think it's okay for the production setup for somebody to figure out how to deploy Redis in a scalable fashion for their needs. Like for example, we have seen numbers from Grange, and for Grange, what we currently have out of the box just works for their production. But for Psionics, it clearly won't. So it's okay to have that. The tricky part that will come in is some of this ties into how our state store implementation reads stuff, right? Like you said, before we used to just directly connect to master. Now we assume that a Sentinel exists. How can we abstract our like OpenMatch from what Redis setup there is kind of what it'll really come down to. So I think that's a solvable problem. Any thoughts there from anybody?
Sorry, could you say that one more time?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think to summarize, Yufan, a lot of the cons that Yufan was mentioning was around how complicated the production setup will get for somebody if they have to set up the Sentinel with Redis with multiple read replicas and then have OpenMatch to figure out or distribute the read across these replicas and whatnot. What I'm trying to say is it's okay to expect that your production that's set up to support millions of players has a more complicated setup than just we have everything running in a cluster kind of a setup. It's just that how we abstract OpenMatch from it is the tricky thing, right? Like we should be able to come up with OpenMatch libraries not directly being impacted by how your Redis is set up in production. But that so long as we are able to do that, I think it's okay for us to expect that, hey, you want to scale OpenMatch to your production setup, here is what you need to do with your Redis.
I think you're right that there's a strong question that needs to be answered there around what is a feature of OpenMatch when it comes to scaling and what is just guidance around OpenMatch when it comes to scaling. I'm actually kind of curious. We have Mark here, who now, upon hearing his name, is trying to figure out what we're talking about. With Agones, I mean, the question of scale for production workloads Yeah. Because there's this kind of batteries included. You can get started. Is that the same system with zero or little configuration that will go all the way up to huge? Or
So
do you
we
need to do a
have-
bunch of work?
Yeah, so probably a bit of both. We have a nice thing that works for us in that you can always run multiple clusters of Kubernetes.
Right.
So we aren't like you'll always have probably a limit on what you can support inside a single cluster, but you can always add more clusters, and so that makes that somewhat easier for us. And then you start stepping into the realm of like Google Cloud Game Servers and stuff, like multi-cluster stuff, which is the multi-cluster stuff is the more complicated part. But that's how we can kind of deal with scale a little easier. We don't necessarily have to funnel everything through in a single install.
Yeah. Okay.
Fair enough.
Yeah. That doesn't help you. Sorry.
No, it's all good. Well, you guys kind of an interesting thing because like you are limited to whatever Kubernetes does, like in terms of master API throughput of like, I'm going to make 1 million allocations in a second. Well, one, that's probably not a scenario, but two, it sounds like you can't. Without
and
stuff.
There are certain limits that Kubernetes has around like how many pods it can run inside a cluster and like at what speed does it do it. And like while it says, hey, we can support up to 5,000 nodes, what that realistically look like it sort of starts shrinking as you add more and more pods. So we've seen an application like people who are running game servers on like Kubernetes as a whole, like around 500 nodes usually sits pretty comfortable.
Okay.
Depending on size and like it sort of varies a lot. So
yeah. Interesting. Well, thank you for chiming in on that. Does provide some context. The single install is definitely challenging. It definitely feels like if the answer to hey, like OpenMatch scales to production loads, and the way it does that is here's a complicated run book for getting Redis set up. That does feel sufficient. It feels like something most people will be able to do. It would be nice. I think that part of our responsibility is to formalize that. Maybe not in the form of a complete chart, maybe not in the form of a, if you twiddle this bit on OpenMatch, it does all this for you, but at least within charts that back up those facts. And also, if Redis is that complicated to set up, I mean, it might be an interesting point to continue investigating things like the memory state store or Elasticsearch as possible options to answer that. And there's always the case that you slow stuff down.
Yeah.
We haven't really pursued the idea that we don't really know why we run stuff at like 300 milliseconds. We just kind of made that up. Right.
Sure.
Okay.
Cool. So I think at some point it'll be a balance between how complicated is that production setup and whether it's reasonable to expect somebody. So for example, when Yufan was pursuing like the cluster mode, that felt like really, really you needed like 3 different set of master slave Redis coordinated together in a Redis cluster that could then shard the right space. Now that seemed like an overkill, but then we were like, okay, just read from multiple replicas seems like a more doable setup. So I think it's going to be a balance. Like if the production setup looks really crazy, then definitely we need to do more just out of box. But if it's not, then that should be okay. I think the tricky part is going to be if we, let's say, go down the Sentinel approach and whatnot. Like what I was saying was, if you bleed a lot of the Redis setup within OpenMatch, that's not good either, because then you would almost force somebody to have that setup, and that's bad. I mean, I think OpenMatch out of box should still support the simple I have a Redis with a master in the cluster, and how do I kind of get going with it scenario as well. So
sure.
Cool. So next steps with just the scale stuff. Any thoughts?
So I have a checklist on an issue. I think the big ones are get the few scale scenarios that we want to have working, like running in the cluster at some scale, without airing out, and then figure out what was going wrong there, and then just like getting some numbers out of it.
Sure.
For what we have, what Yufan has, what I have in progress, and all that kind of stuff. And then I think we should, this is the perpetual, like, oh, it's one day away type thing. So So it's probably best to just say like, we'll have the numbers when we have the numbers, and then we can have a proper discussion about it.
Sure.
Just scheduling something right now.
Sure. So I think we just basically first need to kind of like formalize the load that we'll run across these different kind of the existing, then the read from replica, and the in-memory store. So long as we standardize the load, we should just be able to compare apples to apples numbers and see how we which way to go.
Yeah.
Okay. That's awesome. So that does seem like reasonable next steps. I think next on the agenda is anyways like .9 release timeframes and stuff like that. So I guess we'll come to the timings as we start speaking more about that anyways.
Mhm.
So any other thoughts there, Caleb?
No.
Cool. Do you want to move on to the next? Let me see if we covered everything. You found, did we cover most of what you wanted to present?
Give it a thumbs up.
Okay. Okay.
Microphone turned off.
Okay. So I think before we jump into the release stuff, one thing, Caleb, I wanted as information, or basically for us to establish, was just purely what do we want from .9, and that the answer kind of ties back a little into what are we really hoping to get by GDC. So in my mind, let me present it this way, right? I think GDC is what, early March-ish? So we still have Feb to go. But practically, once the .9 ship has sailed, trying to get stuff into the .10 or 1.0, we'll see what we call that later. But the next release, basically, trying to kind of rely on anything coming in the next release for a GDC dependency may be very tricky.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, let's say, and tell me if this is even a reasonable goal, but if, let's say, you folks have to complete your integration with the real open match in GDC timeframe, and if that's the goal, then .9 should be the release that has everything you need.
Yeah, I think we talked about this last time, but I think .8 pretty much had everything we needed other than stability and perf benchmarking, which you guys managed to get in for this. So issue bar scale, integration blockers, high risk changes. Yeah. Okay. So you were saying?
I'll kind of, we'll actually, the reason I'm kind of trying to do this is basically set up some rules for when we look at the issues and start triaging them. I feel like .10 or anything beyond .9 can be something that is okay to change under the wraps and it makes things better, but doesn't like necessarily have any more integration overheads for you folks, right? Like what would suck is .10 changes something that again now needs Starly to go back and reintegrate anything at all. So long as we kind of have at least the API stuff covered and any major change in behavior covered in .9, then .10 could just kind of get things more reliable, make the config easier, developer experience. But I'm expecting .9 to be like the release you can take in and then hopefully run with it. But to even stress on the goal, is it reasonable to expect that at GDC timeframe, you folks will be using real open match? And if yes, I mean, any thoughts on where that integration would live like and what?
Yeah, so there's two parts to this. One is what is our actual, all right, technical steering committee. Two parts to this. One of them is like, what do we want open match to kind of like have as a presence to encourage and onboard people and get them like excited and explain how to use it and demo it. There's the other part, which is we as technical steering committee members, but also Unity are kind of the first integrators of open match. Is there some type of beat there that is kind of founded in some proof point?
Yes.
Right. I feel like that's what we're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. So I think I'm not talking specifically at all about like the Unity product roadmap or anything like that. But what I'm saying is, if we had to have a GDC open match message, and I'm gonna have the same conversation with Ish in the community meeting, right? Like, are we gonna be in a ready state? It might, like, if we were in a ready state to at least make a statement like, hey, here's OpenMatch and Unity is or Psionics is using it, that gives a lot more credibility than like, hey, a year ago we started this and we are still kind of figuring out who the first users are, right? So I'm trying to see if we'll have any first use cases to in the open source to just speak of at GDC timeframe, just as talking points.
I don't see why not, but I obviously have to take that back and discuss that a little bit more.
Okay.
Just in terms of any game company that integrates with OpenMatch, their GDC beats are going to be like pretty sterile to whatever message they're trying to land.
Absolutely.
This is a partner. I see no reason why like Unity being a consumer and also contributor to OpenMatch isn't something that shouldn't be just like laid out there as like a big like, hey, this is super cool. Unity's on OpenMatch. It's awesome.
Well, absolutely. And actually, in a way, somewhere people are already getting that message. I was looking at your presentation at Unite, and your presentation was like you presenting a lot of OpenMatch internals and how it integrates with Unity as well, right? So I think it's already kind of, the message is already there. It's also a matter of we are looking at 1.0, and do you think, I mean, we'd love to call it 1.0 when, let's say, from your perspective, you think everything is ready for 1.0. Again, it's a question of, if at GDC we were at a point where you have what it needs and we have what it needs from OpenMatch, and let's say we have a couple other folks who are ready to attest it, then we can possibly be calling it 1.0 as well. So I'm trying to think of it from even from that roadmap perspective, like whether we should necessarily try to target 1.0 and GDC together just to make a statement of like it's ready for production, or whether that's just rushing things too much. I mean, as TSC, what do you think? Do you think it helps setting, like trying to target 1.0 and GDC from a...
I just want to be like, no, of course not. Because like they should never collide serendipitously, right? It should always be like a planned concept. Is that 1.0 is meaningful? If 1.0 is, hey, it meets our needs, arguably like 0.8.9 look pretty good. And that's kind of what we discussed before, is like that's 1.0.
Sure.
Be super different. I know we have a lot of people who are now like integrating and discussing it. And so 1.0ing kind of sends the signal like, hey, we've reached a point where you should ship on this. The catastrophic outcome there, of course, is that someone does and it doesn't work, and then they go to the internet and tell everyone it doesn't work.
Sure.
I don't know. I kind of don't think we should fear that. I think we should. We're all here. We're all supporting it. So
we had this conversation in the Agones land as well a while ago, and I think Robbie Bailey, who's on our team, had a good point. And he brought up Kubernetes as a thing. Like 1.0 can often just mean like your API surface is stable. When you looked at like Kubernetes, like when it went 1.0, like it didn't support a very large user base, and like you could only do a certain number of things, but like you were like, we're stable, and that got people to start using it, and then you could kind of iterate from there.
Right.
And I think we were very much the same thing. I was like, oh god, no one's using Agones in production yet. Like I don't want to call it 1.0, but like it's like chicken and egg, right? Like who's going to use it before it's 1.0?
If it's not, yeah.
But once we got to a place where we're like, you know what, this API is stable. Now we can just keep iterating and making it better. I like that perspective, so it might work for you as well. I thought I'd throw that in there as an idea.
That's a really good data point. Yeah, thanks. I guess Agones was probably in a very similar situation last year around this time, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, cool. We are kind of still at this point. I feel like we have some issues where we're like, we actually kind of want to change the API service a little bit. So the core set of API surface is close to being stable, but it's not quite there. And there's some other stuff that we know we need to add eventually, like some sort of stat service, but we don't know what that looks like. And I think it's reasonable even if we do a 1.0 with like this set of core API surfaces is stable.
Yep.
This stat service, like it's there, you can use it, but we'll have a big warning on it. Like this is not stable. We haven't had it around long enough to that it's correct.
Yeah, we wrote a whole doc actually recently where it's like, how do new features go from like alpha to beta to stable? Because like, you're always going to come up with new stuff, and you never know if it's going to be 100% right from out of the gate. So you need to like, this is what Kubernetes does too, right? Like, and so I literally just wrote like all the feature gate stuff and all that stuff, so you can turn on alpha stuff and like turn it off or turn off beta stuff. And that kind of stuff, and like what the rules were for how you would demarcate whether something was alpha or beta or not, and that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think that's totally reasonable.
Well,
Nice.
we could make calls to the stat service, for example, just not work unless you have beta mode on or something.
Or something, yeah.
Yeah. And I think stat service, Scott, is like a good example of, it's almost going to be a separate, I mean, at least looking at what it is, it's going to be a completely separate service surface area. So it's perfect if I think we say it's not the core and it's not stable, but the core is, and that should be okay still. But this is a good example.
Okay. I don't see why not. Sounds great. I love the feature flag concept, Mark. That feels like something we should borrow. If not in the 1.0, but in like almost the first feature we need, we'll need it. So that'll have to come hot on the tail of 1.0.
Steal my code too if you really want it.
Just fork agones and then make a copy.
It's a little library. You just pick it up and move it. I mean, I don't think it matters.
Cool.
I'll rejoin from the other room. Thanks.
There.
Yifan, what were those numbers again for the scale test that you did, the benchmarking?
Oh, you mean simply for the Z-range numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Z-range number are referring to like when we're turning off the read-from replicas mode, or solely with the single master?
Let me check.
Yep.
So the current master configuration is one master, two slaves, correct?
Yes, and the current configuration doesn't have the read-from replicas mode turned on. So basically, the slaves only serves as the place to sync back the data if the master fails.
Right. They're
Yeah.
a master or read from replica turned on with 3 replicas, which I don't think we looked at the chart for that. But what were there's always 60,000 tickets in the pool?
Yes, 60,000 tickets in the pool, and it takes 20 replicas to have it works without any errors.
That is a lot.
Yeah. I know.
That doesn't sound right when I hear it that way. But the thing is, we normally don't have 60,000. I guess so. In our scale testing, we haven't ever had like 60,000 simultaneous. We usually have 5 to 10, and we have 60,000 coming through the system, but they're not simultaneously there. 60,000 concurrent. Let me do a little back of the napkin math here.
So what is your scale number when you have for example 5K tickets pending?
Yeah, let me ping my the person on our team who did the scale test. He's got it somewhere in here. Stress test report. Oh, interesting. Most of our issues were actually front door issues. Around, we had some Nginx problems, but let's see. Yeah, we didn't actually ever get nearly high enough to 60K. We know rivalry tested of 20,000. That's a minute, not a second. And with that, we were having, let's see, matches created, time to match. 8,000 assignment properties. So I believe this is with 4 properties, so not a very high intersection value. 20,000 arrival rate. We had match times of just end-to-end match times of like 2.5 seconds, but the 95th, 99th percentile was 8.
Like
and
8 seconds?
that's with just a single large Redis master.
Uh-huh.
But that's not, I mean, that's a whole factor lower in scale, right?
Mhm.
20,000 arrival rate a minute is still only like 1,000.
So that's like 300-ish tickets per second. Yeah.
Yeah. So not anywhere near. So it's cool seeing that you've managed to kind of eke out 60K simultaneous. That's a pretty big deal. That would support a pretty big game population. Interesting.
Sorry, what was the number again? How many thousand?
He did 60,000.
60,000. Oh wow, okay.
So that was like, yeah, like at first I was like, man, that's not great. And then I kind of thought about it some more. And it's like, we've never scale tested quite like that. We also weren't tuning it for performance or trying to get more out of it. But so it's cool to see that we've managed something like that. That's pretty good. I have to do a little bit more math later to see. Let's see.
So if we have, say, 1 million concurrent players on the game with a 10-minute match time and 10 seconds average matchmaking time,
Sure.
and they're just in that loop, that's about 16,000
16,000 what?
concurrent in the matchmaker.
Okay. Yeah. The tricky part there is that's average 10 seconds. So, if someone's stuck for 30 seconds, it gets a lot closer to that 60,000 if you snowball a little bit. So that's actually pretty fantastic. That's a 1 million person game. Hope we can get to like 10 million. That would probably be like that. That's the headroom to never have to solve this problem again.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're at 10 million and you're having scaling problems, you can afford to shard your player population.
You could probably, at that point, start thinking about that. You're definitely paying processing price to deal with that query. I am curious. So Scott, you're going to go look into the state store, memory store, which we have something similar. I know I've told you that before, which we always get amazing performance out of, but we haven't scale tested that.
Yes.
I'm curious to hear how that goes. I've mentioned Elasticsearch before, but Elasticsearch is definitely designed for stuff like this, especially around these queries and how complicated they get. They also have some crazy language that you can use to construct some pretty impressive queries. That would be pretty cool to let match functions have access to, because I know building a new query in Redis or a query type is pretty complicated.
It just doesn't work.
No, you can't add much. But like Elasticsearch is like a backbone for a ton of massive search systems, and if we really are which it seems like we are really read heavy, and we can queue creates right into some kind of buffer, we can really eke out a ton more scale, I think, on the read side if we use something like a distributed indexing system like Elastic. Just something to think about. That might be something that after 1.0, we on our side, because we'll probably have a lot of infrastructure already set up to go test that, we could go and benchmark Elastic. We also have some reliability folks who have a ton of experience with Elastic, so that might be something we can chew off and contribute back once we see that, especially since we have the benchmarking framework you found. So that'll be really cool.
Awesome. I've been like really, Scott and I were discussing, I would love to have like our state store kind of completely abstracted out as like through a library, such that, if let's say you went down that route, you should be able to just plug in your library that provides the interface implementations, and OpenMatch core shouldn't care. So it's easier said than done. I think Scott's
Yeah.
tried going down that path, and like especially for the in-memory store, it's harder because then you start changing implementations of how things get accessed and whatnot. But I think that would be, in my mind, that would be an ideal state, because that way, if this doesn't work for you, go pick your storage, and so long as you write the interface, OpenMatch shouldn't care, kind of a pattern. But yeah.
The hard part with that is, I would say, OpenMatch is two things. It is a storage of tickets, and it is the backend and synchronizer.
Sure.
And those are basically the only two bits. So when you abstract away like a storage layer, like we have an internal interface, and I tried to use it for maybe 10 minutes before I gave up on it, because the interface is basically OpenMatch's interface. There's very little other than fetch matches that isn't the like interface of the state store itself. So we could do it. It would just be like the front end call to like create a ticket would be choose an ID and then immediately pass it on to state store code. So like it's a abstraction we can make and we can swap out, definitely. But it won't be, most of the complexity will be behind the abstraction and not in front of it.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I mean, what you're saying, I can see that happen but I haven't looked into whether we can find an abstraction just to state storage that kind of just hides how you pick but you may be right. So I haven't given that like in our specific use case, I haven't given that a thought. But in the past, I've worked with in teams before where you just abstract the state storage or essentially the storage layer such that in tests you can plug in your in-memory, and then in production you can wire up to whatever is the production and then stuff like that, right? Like, so that's typically what teams would do. But I guess, okay, we can look into that. I mean, but if we had that, then this kind of stuff would be really straightforward. So then it's like you don't even need to wait for 1.0. You can swap it out right at the get-go. But yeah. Cool. Do you want to go to the issue triage?
Yeah.
I think before we get there,
sounds good.
Probably just along with it, what do we think? So we are kind of already past due the 6 weeks ish. Now, if to finish the scale investigations and kind of come up with a reasonable approach, Scott and Yufan, since you folks are majorly handling this effort, would like to get a gut feel of how much more time do you think, and should we kind of hinge that to .9 or not?
So for .9, I think we should get the scale tests functional, like not falling over with numbers we know should work, and like figure out what's going on with the weird behavior. And then we should have probably finish up the streaming in the backend synchronizer. And I think at that point, it is probably time to cut.
Okay.
Because getting all of the state store stuff finalized is going to be a long while. And the value of a cut train is that it like forces you to get on the train.
Sure.
And the changes to synchronizer are valuable enough that it's probably worth getting them out to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'd love that.
Absolutely. I think that's useful. Yufan, on your end, if you were to, let's say the Sentinel not replicated, but offloading reads to Redis replicas, do you think that's like, is that like in a prototype state, your implementation, or do you think it's like ready for if you were to? Because the way I'm looking at it is, that seems to me as an improvement over the current anyways. So even if we were to change it later, that seems like a natural, like, sure, we have right now just read from master, check in whatever is required to offload the reads to replicas. It seems like an improvement, and then kind of take a next step if we think that's not sufficient. So I don't know if your thoughts, you think you're ready to have that in, or do you think
so for enabling the Sentinel, so that part is in. Is already have a PR for it, but that part doesn't have, like, it doesn't support direct access to Redis master. So maybe I'll like refine that PR a bit and add that functionality back, because people like who are still like who don't use Sentinel might still need that features anyway. Yeah, but overall, I think like the new features itself is ready for review. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, then I would like to hear the thoughts from everybody else as to like whether we agree that it's just like offloading reads to the replicas seems to me like a natural way to like. I mean, it doesn't hurt unless you tell me that there are some gotchas to it. So maybe that's something we can, anyways, if we have it ready, we can possibly have that in. So .9 does that. Hopefully, it scales better than .8 then, and then we evaluate that and see if we. So, any thoughts on that?
The one thing I heard that I'm still a little concerned about on the read from replica, we mentioned the stale data. We kind of glossed over it as like we're actually kind of okay with it because we don't make this guarantee. But I am curious to hear, what is our hit rate for reading stale data? Is it high? The impact is like very real, right? Basically, match functions over a run could produce the following run. If it's slow enough, the following one could produce a match that also has several hundred to 1,000 players in that match that are already awaiting assignments.
Okay.
That's a good point. Our from my correctness point, we do not check to make sure that a ticket is still around, which is probably something we should do anyways when we're sticking out the back end. And I think for assignment as well. I'm not quite sure there. So if we're reading stale data, we might actually have a correctness problem.
We should. Okay, let's do this. Let's take that offline, and I'll take a look into what the consequences of stale data are and how stale are we talking about here. It's basically staleness that would be whatever it takes for Redis slaves to kind of get the latest changes from the master. So let me read up a little more on that and see if that's actually a real concern, and that if that is, then the entire approach is kind of hosed for us, right? If it impacts correctness, but
I think there's a number that is correct that would be fine. Like, hey, over the course of like an hour or over the course of several million tickets, you're going to end up with between 5 and 20 processed by a director. Like when you do a fetch match, you're going to find that every once in a while this happens. It just needs to be a really small number.
Okay.
Then people can kind of like losing that guarantee. I think it sucks, but we also weren't guaranteeing it necessarily anyways because there are other timers in the system.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay,
so I'll try to do some due diligence to figure out what that really looks like and if it should be concerning. But if not, then I think it's something reasonable to shoot for as something that can go in .9. And if we decide to go with the state store implementation, then I don't think that's .9 timeframe. Scott, correct me if I'm. We should be able to make that call, but I don't think the entire implementation.
I think we should be cutting 0.9 in a week.
Let's look at the remaining issues before we let's see what payload should go in, right? I mean, again, my question is whether folks will be, if Caleb tells me that he'll be able to integrate with it without any of the things in the triage list, then we can cut it today. But let's see if we can make that call after we triage the issues.
Yeah.
Triage. Ready for triage? Let's see. Breaking. I'm not projecting, so somebody or maybe I should project.
There's an option within your Hangouts. Oh wait, you're on. Never mind, you're on GVC. I know. Never mind. Good.
So I think first I've kind of just shortlisted the breaking API change labels because these I think are the ones we hopefully my take is anything that matters should be front loaded into .9 because this is the stability bit, and after that we can see if whatever is required is even required. So since most of them are on Scott's plate, and I can actually take a few of them, but let's see. Okay. API change, add MMF status to fetch matches. Scott, you want to talk about this?
Okay. So general problem is that we support and we want to support a match function returning tickets or I guess it's not supported today, but we want to support it. A match function returning tickets, and then getting canceled, or returning matches, not tickets, and then processing those matches and returning them, and then saying like there also was an error with the match function, so that if we are timing out on our match functions, but they are producing results, you are able to bring the pool down with the results that were produced. Otherwise, you have a problem with the death spiral of you get too many tickets in the system and you always time out, and you will never resolve that until players give up waiting on the match and they close the game. So that's a problem. The proposal here is we need to, or like we can send an additional message back from fetch matches, which is like, this is the status of this MMF. The other problem here is we have our current match function run supports multiple match profiles, which branches out into multiple calls. So one of those calls could fail and the other ones all succeed. And we really just want to process all the ones that succeeded. So the proposal here is we return like an additional status back for each match function that's run. Recently, I've been thinking about it, and there might be another approach, which we've talked about. Currently, you can pass multiple match profiles to a fetch matches call. If we reduce that down to one profile, then, and I'm not quite sure about the gRPC guarantees here, but if gRPC guarantees that if you send a message and then send an error, or then close the connection with an error, that the message is sent on a stream, and then the error is sent or received on the client side, then what we could do is reduce the match function to just one match function, and we will just if the match function failed, we'll just return that error last, and but first we'll return all the matches that came out of it that went through.
So you don't lose any valid result. Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure about how gRPC works in that aspect. I looked into it a little bit, and I found some stuff that said the errors are passed in the HTTP trailers. So they'll come after any messages, but I don't know if that guarantees that both the server and client will send all the messages on the stream before the error gets processed. So I don't know if like there's a buffer that kind of gets dumped because there was an error that came along or not, or whether they process the full buffer and then do the error. So that's the part that I'm not sure about yet. So I guess thoughts, opinions. Like I think if gRPC does guarantee that it works that way, it would be much simpler to say you can only pass one match profile. You're going to get an error back if that match function failed, or we could talk to it or whatever. And this also has added benefit of currently we're like, you want to do that anyway to spread out your load on your backends. Or at least
that was actually, yeah. So that was my, let's actually almost decouple the two out of it, not necessarily because we need this. A question would be, do we really need more than a match profile on a same fetch matches call?
You know, I'm trying to remember the history behind why that is. I think there was this moment of clarity where almost anyone who's running match profiles are generating them, right? They're not just saying like run these 10. They're going to be like massaging it, and there's a system that massages it. It's very convenient to pass one call that is a bulk request and then receive bulk results. The alternative is like, hey, I'm going to generate 2,000 function runs. okay, now that I have 2,000 profiles generated, I'm now going to spin up 2,000 requests in the backend from my one process.
Yes.
It's a bit more complicated. I don't imagine it's too bad.
Yeah.
It does introduce, I have 2,000 connections that need to close before I can effectively move on.
That is what we're doing in the scale test at the moment, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's not working, so I can't. I don't know if that's a problem. But
No, I think the reason I'm curious about that as a separate issue is just because I remember when we were discussing this with Isha as well, this came up. So right now, there is this almost like, one of the principles of like, if you don't really need to provide options, please don't kind of. I mean, where today we have an option, and when somebody asks me like, hey, should I club all of these up on one profile, or should I just send a fetch matches per profile? And it's almost like I don't have a great answer. I can tell you something about synchronization cycles and stuff like that, where all of them on one fetch matches still ensures that they all get considered for a synchronization cycle, whereas separate fetch matches may potentially go onto separate cycles. That's a reason I can generate, but I don't know if it's like, if it's a deal blocker or if it's sufficient enough to kind of complicate the API surface.
Well, considering that the backend API is no longer the synchronizer and actually horizontally scales, it's probably more fine. It used to be that everything was handled in memory on the backend thing.
True.
And then you'd have 2,000 requests come in, and it kind of like, I can only handle about that many. Because the idea used to be that you would send like 10,000 in, right? And so we were like, oh, we definitely need a bulk API. In the new world, where like we already know that we literally can't run more than, I don't know, 2,000 concurrent functions, at least in a reasonable way, for the synchronizer streaming. That maybe that could go up now with the streaming stuff, but is there really a whole lot of point in having a bulk API?
Yeah,
it does match the paradigm, is that most of these things get activated and have similar profiles to the one to the left and to the right, but they are slightly modified in the thing they're querying for, right?
So how about let's just simplify it then?
Yeah, I think that's fine. We'll
work out.
Seems like an okay way to do it. I would imagine that this is an interesting separation. Okay, sorry. I imagine this is also an interesting separation, because if we move towards a, fetch matches.
It still stays fetch matches, but
yeah, it still stays fetch matches. But now you just pass in, hey, run this function with these parameters,
basically,
and it's going to produce results.
Yes.
The future improvement to this is that we actually have profile generation. Figure out a way to make that a first-class concept, and now it's like fetch. There's like a fetch matches that takes profile envelope generator or something like that. Anyways, yeah.
Awesome. I think we've heard about the profile generation as a requirement as well. So yeah, definitely something that we should look into in future. But so for now, if we simplify that, Scott, then for the approach that you're mentioning around, maybe there is a little offline work that we can do to figure out if there are those guarantees. And if not, then assuming this approach, can we do better than to actually pass the status? But again, a question on the meta issue here, right, is, and Caleb, I don't know if the core of the problem got through to you, but basically, if an MMF is generating and it's kind of like you cut it off, we still process the partial results. We return to you the partial results, because that way we are reducing the pool. And does an error in that case even make sense? Let's assume now a one function for one fetch match thing. Is it just a status at that point? Like, it looks more like natural to me that it's a status, which is like, here's a partial result and a status that indicates it's partial. But is it an error at that point at all?
This is such a great question. We encountered this about 2 weeks ago. And of course, we haven't met since then, right? But yeah, we had this issue where it's like, we had this one profile that would throw an exception on this one function, and then it would throw out all the results.
Yeah.
And we sort of said like, the open match guys are smart. They'll figure this out. So we just throw out the bad one and keep the rest. Which it sounds like that's what you're asking, is like, that seems fine. But do we need to capture it in a status? Well, if we move to this world, then no, right?
I still think like error is probably something that you expect the caller to treat differently. Like I would be afraid if I'm calling fetch matches as an end user, that it may be obvious to me like, hey, if the fetch to me. So I mean, a status feels more natural to me in the sense that
We'll have to definitely like document the behavior. Like a caller to fetch matches, any caller is gonna have to deal with this complexity.
yeah. I mean, I think we'll have to document it. I'm not sure if there is a pattern to this, right? Like when you return partial results and then like say that, hey, this is just partial. Is there any pattern out there which says whether there is an error or not? But anyway, we can find that offline. But looks like at least let's do the one per fetch match, and then we can figure out what's the best way to deal with it. Then how about that, Scott?
Okay. I'll make a note of that.
And do we think this is .9 then? I would think so.
Yeah, that's easy. Mostly because like we can change the API, and then in the like our code inside can take a array of one match profile.
Okay, so
simple enough.
Okay, so we keep it .9 though because it does have a user surface.
Yeah,
change.
like let's get the breaking change in quick. And if people scream at us for it, we can change it back if we decide they screamed for good reasons.
Perfect. I think this renaming thing, we spoke about it last time. I'll just summarize it quickly unless we just said, let's do it for the data service or the query service for now. Let's keep the other things intact and just rename mmlogic to like query service.
Sorry. Yeah.
I was trying to read up like, yeah, sorry.
I think I still want to revisit assigned tickets being on the back end, just because the performance and query pattern, the way it works, but I don't know.
I think we had like some discussion.
So it's probably fine.
Okay. I mean, here's the thing. I think let's read up again the discussion we had last time. I think there was discussions around who calls it and what's the roles and tackles for the caller and stuff like that, and to keep that convenient, right? So I think we made a decision last time. So let's probably stick to that at least for this release. And if we have any other arguments, we can again bring it up. I think it will be for .9. Let's just change the logic name.
We need to rename. Yeah. I'm still not happy with front end and back end, but I haven't thought of any better ideas at this point. So, yay!
I think this one actually was. I apologize. I think we didn't take any notes, and we or maybe in Caleb's notes there is something about this. Oh no, Scott mentioned it. Okay, renaming makes sense. However, status isn't intuitive. Maybe rework. So I think.
Yes, we're also figuring this one out. Okay.
Do you think it's best to keep it out of .9 till we figure it out, or?
I mean, the renaming makes sense.
Sure.
That's easy enough.
Yeah.
And like always including it if they didn't put it on there. And
I think somehow we thought like just a string status at that point might be useful, but I don't know if that's kind of what we concluded. This is where I'm blanking out.
Well, so Caleb's point was like, this isn't really an RPC. Why does it have RPC status on it?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think from open matches, like zoomed in an open match, that is true. But from a game client perspective, I like send a request of like, give me a match, and I get a response of here's your assignment. In that sense, it kind of does make sense. There might be some streaming and more statuses coming back, but from the sense of like, I tried to make a request and I got a response. Like it took a while because of matchmaking, but that model is still there. So it kind of makes sense.
So yeah, again, Caleb, if you have any suggestions, I guess or if you're okay punting this to the next release, then we can just not discuss it right now until you have more.
I don't know if we're gonna get more clarity on this one. I mean, we don't use it. Someone might use it.
So is a string okay?
If your goal is to let's think about it from the Open Match front door perspective. You know, someone is going to, let's see. Currently, it's create. Sorry, actually, I don't have the API in front of me, but it's create ticket, right?
Yeah.
And then it's get ticket, or is it just streamed at that point?
No, I think it's get ticket. I mean, the streaming one we are trying to get rid of, so ignore that.
And right now, get ticket gets you the whole deserialized ticket.
Yes.
It doesn't. We don't have like a status object or like a,
get assignment. No,
we don't have anything like that. Sub resources. And so if it was a sub resource, you could have a concept of status for the purposes of managing the request.
Mm-hmm.
Like this get for this assignment didn't work. In terms of using the assignment to signify something to the user, we basically kind of all agree it should be extendable. And so the assignment today has a connection, which I still think that's pretty common sense. Like we don't need it to just be a byte array. But unless Open Match has an opinion about what that status should be, almost feels like an extension point to me.
Any string or any again.
whatever extension was that.
Well, it has
okay.
on it. So like,
it has what on it?
It does have extensions on it. So
great, we can just get rid of status.
Sure.
I mean,
yeah, status could be a part of the.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we're kind of hitting when we were hitting our bottleneck with Redis was just like we're kind of stuck doing polling until we have a more robust. I think most games will be in the situation where they're stuck with polling until they have something better. And so from a polling perspective, you definitely expose yourself to all the fine-grained throttling concerns and reconnect storms that sometimes come with exposing yourself to game client behavior. And so right now we're kind of having a lot of perf issues around reads, just gets of tickets where we deserialize the whole thing. We're debating whether or not having a sub status on just assignments or some kind of discernible ticket state that signifies whether or not you should fetch the whole ticket. It still feels a little advanced for this. We don't use status at all. Okay. I'm not sure you need status. It's settable, I guess, from like a director. When you do the assignment, you can put whatever you want in there. And so connection was kind of generally speaking, everyone needs connection, but then what else do they need?
Yep.
They need a property bag. They need just some place they can serialize some data.
Yeah.
Oh, you're also typing. Okay.
I'll think a little about this a little more, but this sounds roughly right.
Let's do this. I've added a comment on the issue. We can maybe take the discussion on the issue, and if for .9, we can possibly just consider removing it and see if that stakes. If it doesn't, revisit .10.
We can bring it back if we want to.
Yeah.
That's easy. It's easier to bring it back after 1.0 than have it be there for 1.0 and then discover it's awful. I agree.
We still have rosters and profiles, right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We do.
Okay. See, things can live. It's fine.
If we aren't using it, maybe I think we should probably try the similar approach. Do you mind creating an issue for it, and we can discuss that then, just so that if it's recorded, but sure. Just have an issue.
Are you doing that or?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay.
Breaking API change.
Okay. I will actually note. Sorry, I forgot to when I was talking about my custom implementation for the storage. One of the nice things is that I have a stream coming out of like, hey, these are how tickets are changing. And I have like an authoritative source on this that I can like do whatever, like I can create whatever stream I want with this. So I didn't implement it, but it is like pretty easy, less than a day's work to add something to the front end where it also attaches to the stream, and it can know like, hey, like it just has it doesn't need the whole tickets in the memory, but it can just say like, this ticket got assigned, okay, now it's deleted. Okay, this one got assigned, now it's deleted. So requests coming into the front end would know like the whole state of the set of tickets that have assignments. And it can, like, if you're saying, hey, I want to wait for an assignment on this ID, like it doesn't need to go to the storage. It can just go to the front end, and the front end can say, hey, you have an assignment, or I don't know, let's check to make sure you're still not deleted, but okay, you're going to wait.
If you're going to go that route, you need to come up with how you're going to do at least once guaranteed delivery. Because if you lose that front end and you've moved it to the front door, it could be on every front end. And I think that's maybe what you're saying is that you've got this.
Well, yeah, I've got the set of assignments. There's a little bit of a problem of like the ticket's been deleted, so you're gonna be waiting forever. But so like if you check once, like at the start of the call of like, make sure I'm not deleted or assigned. Okay, like I know I'm in a pending state or a listed state or whatever. So I'm gonna wait on the stream for it to tell me, hey, you've got assigned.
Right. I mean, you're trying to solve the connection, the streamed response. Which, by the way, speeds up a ton of things and removes a lot of concerns with the polling. But what happens in your streaming model where I then added a front door? Does it have to reprocess the whole stream to catch up to figure out what the current state of everyone's tickets are?
So the way my internal representation works is that there's a stream coming out, but it can make a new stream that is like like the client sees it as just like a stream, but it's all of the updates to get you to like what the current state is, and then updates on top of that. So it doesn't need to process the last 20 minutes of tickets or whatever.
I got you.
Here's the current state. Here's the processing after that.
I will reveal, and Mark is keen on this a little bit as well. One of the most frustrating things of working in which is that they're on consoles and none of them have HTTP 2. I just cut out, didn't I?
Yeah.
Okay.
A little bit. But you were complaining about how consoles don't work for gRPC or anything.
Nothing works with gRPC. And so, yes, I could have a WebSocket service that then turns the request into a gRPC request that then I get my streamed responses back from, and I'm able to push them back down. Chances are this isn't the only thing in the system that needs that. And so most people build a connection service with a message broker that everything in this ecosystem can publish, formatted messages into. And that system guarantees that, hey, like if they're connected, I'll send it. And if they're not, I'll send a toast. And depending on their like presence in social settings, I'm going to send an email, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So cool to have an open match. Would definitely be cool. I'm not saying that that it wouldn't be cool, because having some type of streamability would definitely make this a much more batteries included project.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and I've thought about the similar thing.
Yeah. Like
at one point I was like, why do we need this? If it's easy, then it's nice to have. But if it's not easy, then we might want to remove it because we know we need this other solution eventually anyways.
I mean, do we need to start a new open source connection service?
Maybe.
I'll tell you this much. Deciding on the transport alone is going to really boil the ocean.
I've often wondered as well, like, is there an easy way of just doing like a WebSocket type thing if that's supported by a bunch of stuff?
I say we as in Unity specifically, and this isn't any big secret or anything, but we're definitely interested in like some type of WebSocket type solution to this, because we know that it works everywhere. Even if it's not the best on the market today. I mean, it works in browsers right? Like that's a huge start.
There are some gRPC proxies that'll do WebSockets. I've not played with them, so I'm not sure how well they work and stuff.
And for what it's worth, doing something like AMQP or gRPC over WebSocket is a thing. There's like a routing component you have to solve in the backside of that. So you open your connection, you send your gRPC request over that, and then on the other side, it's basically like a proxy where it's sitting in the cloud.
I mean, the other side is you start doing stream HTTP, right?
On the next meeting.
Sorry?
Should we invite someone from gRPC to be on the next meeting and answer questions, whatever?
I think we have a pretty good sense of. My initial reaction is no, just because I think we have a pretty good sense of what's possible with OpenMatch on gRPC, and that it is a great piece of infrastructure that we can leverage today as like a backend service. Yeah. But because it's gRPC is always going to have client connectivity issues if that's how you want to host your front door.
The problem with games is that gRPC has a great set of libraries and everything for all of the things that are in the web world, and that's wonderful. And we use it for that. Video games do not live in the web world. People write their own languages and then write a video game in the language all the time.
Yeah.
So having, and like people run on weird consoles and all of that. So there's a general problem of like, whatever you're doing, someone's going to have to write a custom implementation to talk to it. And platform support's going to be icky. So this is a general problem. I think this is a good discussion to have probably another time because we're getting low on time here and we have some other issues for time frame. But yes, I agree that we should discuss this kind of problem.
That's a good suggestion, though, April. I keep forgetting that we have access to include some of these people, not just from the community, but also from like Knative, if we want to talk to them again on the other side of 1.0, which is something we talked about as being like a 1.1 type thing. And then also gRPC, which we continue to have broad discussions with gRPC all the time, and it's just the platform conversation has really killed a lot of that. Okay,
you're up.
Okay, so I think the last two, so I've added a note for that one. For the last two, I think this one's on Caleb, the evaluator returning only match IDs. We needed input from Caleb last time for how to proceed with this, or was it a yes, no? Whether it's sufficient for the evaluator to not return back any additional appended context. You said you would kind of look into it if there is any
right.
or just have match IDs.
I think just having match IDs is fine.
Okay.
Let me go and comment.
Okay, that's perfect.
And the reason why I'm saying that is because the minute it's not fine, we can just add an extension and be happy, right?
So for now, this one's targeted to .9 as well. Again, it's something that changes the surface, so we should probably front load it.
That's easy enough. Let's just do it.
Yeah. For the last one, I think it's .10 right now, so let's kind of keep it that way. Add all query ticket IDs to MMLogic. Let's discuss it when we get to that. It's a new API addition, so it doesn't impact any of the current usable surface. So let's just point even the discussion for that to future.
This it unfortunately also hits the stat service because it's based on what stat service API we give, whether it just makes sense for it to be on a stat service call.
Yeah, so that's the note on it currently. So let's keep it at that. So that's that. Now let's look at anything else .9 that's not a breaking change. Scale test to-dos, I think this is fair. We've covered enough of it. So Scott has some really nice formatted list of things in there to do. So that's .9 makes sense. Specify individual resource requests for synchronizer.
I think this is just all of the services need individual resource requests to get scale happy.
Sure, yeah. But is that .9, do you think? I think this can be .10.
Maybe.
I mean, it's basically
It
more
might
configurability of open match services, right?
it might be 0.9 if we need to do it to make things not fall over with the
Okay.
minimal scale test.
So let's do that. If it's required, I think that's kind of what I added as a note to that. Yeah, now that I remember. If this turns out to be a blocker for scaling, then let's take it on 0.9. If it's just a configurability thing, then .10 is okay.
You can move it to .10.
Okay.
And we fix it so it won't show up on the milestone, but we know scale is a milestone for 0.10. So
Okay, I'll do that.
So
Perfect. Looked at the breaking changes already. Open match should generate unique match identifiers. I don't know if we haven't yet found I know this is more like to avoid folks shooting themselves in the foot. We had a good discussion on this last time. I don't think it's compelling enough for .9 right now in the next week. So if not, we can possibly push the discussion out for that for future. Let's see. Start streaming where possible, Scott. I think this is just work in progress, and for you to do more stuff there. But again, if it doesn't fit in .9, I'm okay with that. It doesn't change the behavior directly. We looked at the breaking change. OpenMatch does not refresh match function client cache. This is basically if you, I think in some of the testing, I've hosted a service for the client. I don't bring down OpenMatch. I again rehost the same match function. I think there is some caching issue in here that needs to be explored where OpenMatch will try to reach out to the same old endpoint and not refresh it. But that's like a bug. So we'll take a look at it. I'm okay punting this to .10 as well, just because it's a very specific case where you're trying to test it out again and again by redeploying the match function. Doesn't really impact adoption at all. So if there is no thoughts, we can kind of punt it to .10. Linkerd. Switch from gRPC client side load balancing to Linkerd. Yukon, do you think?
Yep. So I think after getting the Sentinel code checking, I started to work on this one. So I think it's probably still in scope of 0.9 because it's production or scale related. Yeah.
do you have an idea of how much work this is going to be?
I think probably three work days, 2 or 3 work days.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it. Especially because I think this is causing us problems in the scale tests. I was seeing a lot of could not connect errors.
Oh, really?
In the pile of errors that I was looking at. So I think as Kubernetes is going, oh hey, I gotta scale this stuff. It's or I gotta move this around. We're getting errors out of that. So it'd be nice if Linkerd could be better on top of that.
I think because I was also seeing, I was also able to see such errors cannot connect to Redis or Analogics or themselves, but yeah, it seems like sometimes it's just because these pods are crashing or I don't know. Yeah, we can talk about later today.
Yep. Let's keep it for .9 for now, and we'll see if, again, we can have an offline discussion to see if it's actually impacting scale. If not, we can move it to .10 based on the effort needed. How about that?
Sure.
Okay. Inability to select indexes. I was pushing for this. For now, I'm okay punting it to .10. Just for context, Caleb, this is the issue where today we actually index every property that actually comes in on the ticket. When we made that change, we removed the ability to configure indexes. I was lobbying to bring that ability back. It's okay to do everything by default, but somebody may not want to necessarily, somebody may have, and I think this was based off of a discussion we had where you may have a lot of properties on the ticket and may just want it to index a few of them. So today we don't do that. Again, I'm okay punting it to .10, and then we can see if it's required at all or not. But for now, I'll keep the issue, just have it .10.
We should .10 this, and then, yeah, I agree that there should be a config-bound way of doing this. And I'm happy to defer to whatever y'all have in mind.
Okay.
The default has really been nice. So I do say we keep that.
Perfect.
The next two also, I think, could just be punted. I don't know if you want to discuss them, but that's my vote.
Sorry?
The next two can also be punted.
Yeah, I think the next one for sure. I've proposed punting it to .10 if you're okay with it. This is basically just stating that there are a lot of like what happens when a ticket is stale, a ticket gets lost, and this is a lot of this seems like guidance for production. So we should revisit it before 1.0, but for .9 it isn't anything burning that we need fixing. So that sounds good. And this next one is the same thing, which is like, again, it's one of the more corner cases, not really something that that'll block adoption. So with that done, and the last one, we are already kind of like benchmarking scale characteristics, so I'll keep it there, right? So that said, we have these many. Like, when do we think is a reasonable? I think 1 week is a stretch, Scott. I know you mentioned 1 week, but I feel like one is a stretch for these.
Yeah, I agree with that.
We should shoot for 2. And I think that might be reasonable, but I'll hear your and rest of your thoughts on that. What do you think?
Shoot for 1. We won't make it, but we can shoot for it.
We can shoot for end of the week, but
okay. Yeah.
I mean,
End of next week, we should have a good idea.
Sure.
And if we still don't have a good idea, we should be not happy with that, and we should be reconsidering.
So end of next week, we should have a good idea for sure. I think it's when we think. So right now, I've moved this date to 1/31. Let's see, and if I don't want to keep it that way, because if we keep it that way, it always just sticks. But yeah, I think that's kind of 2 weeks out. I mean, assuming this as a 4 week. So should we just keep it at that?
Yeah. Question about this is we've been doing release candidates. I don't know if we've ever got feedback on them.
Yeah.
Do we still want to do that? Like, oh, here's a release candidate, and then 2 weeks later, now it's released, and then we get feedback. Or actually, we get feedback like a few weeks after that, right? Like someone finally goes, okay, now I'll like use it, and then, or more likely, the next person to come along and start using OpenMatch just uses the latest version. And then
Let's just release it.
Yeah, I love that idea. Let's actually, for this one, let's try just releasing it, because there is a bunch of overhead on like doing the release process, sending out those emails and whatnot, and we are in kind of like a crunch time. So we just basically, this time let's release it, and worst case, if it comes to it, we'll do hot fixes. I mean,
yep, that's why we have a hotfix process.
Yeah.
The process is the same. It's just what we call like the different release cuts.
So
for 1.0, maybe we'll bring it back, but yeah.
That makes sense. So I think that's all good. There was one other issue that I listed out as something we should discuss. So I'll bring it up now that we are done with discussing most other stuff. Let me see here. This is currently marked as 1.0. I mean, the reason I'm discussing it is because we can even choose to punt it, maybe a really short discussion, so we still leave a few minutes for release planning. But this was when we were discussing, like, hey, when we query for a pool today, we could potentially just overwhelm OpenMatch with a lot of results, whether we should actually have like a limit to say this is the only number of results we'll process. There are pros and cons of doing this. I mean, one way we can do is do nothing about it and say, hey, if you reach this state, things are gonna crash OpenMatch. That's okay. This is more like OpenMatch protecting itself from things blowing up. Any quick thoughts?
Not quick one.
We don't really need to discuss this right now. I was just like, we have kept punting this in future because trying to do it is like, has a lot of other drawbacks. So it seems like the right thing to do, but.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a complicated one.
Okay, let's not waste the last few minutes on that. Let's leave it at let's sleep over it, because it almost seems necessary to protect open match, but at the same time, it could have issues with like the behavior, significant behavioral issues with if misconfigured. So anyway, I think the last couple of things. One, and I'll kind of from Caleb's earlier response, I think I have the response here. But should we be shooting for .10, or do we think it's okay to kind of shoot 1.0, or like how do we as a TSC how do we want to go about it?
Let's do .10.
.10.
Yeah.
But do you, in general, Mark can pitch in as well. In general, my question is 1.0 something we shoot for as a 1.0, or is it like if .10 feels stable enough, we make that a 1.0? What kind of was followed in Agonis? Mark, any thoughts? I don't think Mark did, yeah.
I think what did we do? I can't remember what the version number was. I think at the time we were just like, yeah, this feels pretty stable. We're really happy about it. And we just went, the next release will be 1.0.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds like you're continually adding stuff anyway. So like if you've released 0.10, you're like, oh, the next release will be 1.0. You probably got 2 or 3 PRs in there anyway. So like, I don't think it makes any difference really.
Okay, no, that's fantastic. I mean, basically then kind of the answer is let's just keep the next one as .10. And if it feels stable and we don't have too many issues that we really need fixing after that, let's call it 1.0 as the next release. Otherwise, we'll kind of see where it is. I think if we are shooting for end of this month as the next one, then probably the next release is going to be after GDC. Again, we'll reconvene on the next TSC and see what we want to shoot for. But
we'll be in GDC actually. Yeah.
Sorry?
6 weeks from end of the month is GDC, so we will be hitting it.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to kind of then we can even decide if there is any things that really need fixing before GDC based on what our GDC goals are, and then we can actually have a shorter release before GDC if need be.
Yeah.
Can we plan on having another meeting then before here and there? Maybe in like, I know we have a community meeting next week. Probably not the right time and place to discuss it, but maybe the following week, let's have another meeting and we can talk GDC beats. I don't know I know April already left already, but if there was going to be like a talk or a booth or, try and get open match out there, it'd be nice to know what we're doing.
We, as far as I know from talking to our people, we currently don't have anything that is open match specific. Open match is part of our story, but it's not like we're not going to have like a dedicated "this is open match" piece to our GDC. I think we will be at GDC. Like we're planning on it. I don't know how much we're going to be there or how many of us are going to be there, but I think we definitely want to do some like, hey, like the open match engineers are at GDC, like message us and we'll come meet with you and we can give you any rundowns or whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we're going
to say. It sounds like the sort of conversation, Caleb, that we should take offline with some of our marketing people.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
Recorded. Yeah. So anyway, then I think that's it. I think the only note other than that I mentioned, and I want to make sure we don't bite ourselves back with .9 here, is we are making a bunch of changes. I just want to make a mental note to myself around like the developer experience, because we did a lot of iterations last time to kind of come to a good state. And if we don't pay attention to what happens on the website and the tutorials, we may again shoot ourselves in the foot. So I want to I'll work with John as well on that to see if there is some DevX work that's needed even for .9 that I don't want to I want to make sure it's on our radar for the next 2 weeks.
Yep. Okay. We're over. Scott, you got a quick thing?
Maybe. I did want to make a quick note of there has been some discussion on Slack recently. And there's a couple people who are talking about like front end and director type stuff. And my feedback has been, this is what we're kind of recommending you do as our best guess. We don't have good guidance on this yet. We're interested in if you want to contribute stuff to the open source community. Like we'd love it if you like wrote a front end and contributed it. But we're not actively working on that at the moment. I'm interested from a DevRel perspective if that seems like a reasonable answer. Yeah.
Seems legit.
It's
yeah.
it's definitely something like people are going to hit a lot because it's like the two pieces around OpenMatch, like you need them. There's a lot of stuff that we probably can do in open source, but we just don't have time to do it yet.
Yeah. Maybe we can even we can revisit that in the community meeting next week around like, I think there is OpenMatch ecosystem discussion that we've had, and I definitely would like to see more on that, but like just in general kind of see if we can get a lot more of those folks that you're just mentioning. Let's try to get them into the community meeting and have like a face-to-face on that. How about that?
Yep.
Awesome. So I think between the last thing is between now and the release, I think for the scale, we probably need to meet again. Maybe we can just actually do that as a part of the community meeting is an hour. So long as Scale Up, you will be there for the community meeting. Whatever time remains within the hour, we can again revisit the scale numbers and whatnot. We can repurpose sometime in the hour itself. That way we don't have to set aside more time. Do you think that will be reasonable?
I think that'll be reasonable.
Perfect. Okay, then that's it from my side.
Cool. All right. Let's plan on meeting up next week and then the week after to finish up some of the other stuff.
Perfect. Thank you so much, folks.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.